you all so much for coming today. These quarterly forums are put on by our LEAP committee here at GAR, and we try and make the content as valuable and pertinent as possible. We found a need for this forum with the market that we're in right now. A lot of buyers are writing offers prior to doing the due diligence that they may have done a couple years ago in fear that they're going to lose out if they waste any more time. So we just wanted to walk you through some best practices and pitfalls that you can coach your clients through and prep them for before they even become a big problem. All right, first we're going to start with the top 5 pitfalls during inspections. The first one is previous remodel work not being done properly.
Raise your hand. You've been in here, if you've been in the business more than 10 years, raise your hand. Okay, less than 10 years, raise your hand. It's almost 50-50. So one of the problems that you have when you're dealing with work that's done improperly, you get it on the inspection, is perhaps you hear a little bit of panic in an inspector's voice. Oh, this is all done wrong. This house is going to fall down. You feel like, you know, it's a horrible place to be. But you got to be careful, because I know as a realtor, your clients are responding to your body language and your reaction. And so picture you going to the doctor, and the doctor's all broken out in hives, and he's like freaking out, and he's like, I got to tell you something, you got a cold. So yes, there are issues with work that's done improperly, but you got to relax a little bit and figure out what improperly is. So you want to look at it as a realtor as much as you do the contractor, and don't necessarily take the tone that it's set in as matter of fact. We all have jobs to do, and we all know inspectors are wanting to make sure that they're worth their money, and so they're going to point things out. That's what they do. But we can react in a different, we can react in a calm manner, and that will help a lot in terms of people. The second thing that I was asked a lot, you guys probably hear this, can we do this, can we do that? Can this be fixed? Can we do that, change this? Can that be put back together? Can. And one of the best answers you guys can offer everybody is yes. Answer yes to everything. Can that be done? Yes. We can burn the house down and start over. Anything can be done. Anything can be fixed. Anything can be redone. It's just a matter of reading your clients and knowing, is this something they're going to want to do? Is this something that they want, that they're going to be able to do? Some people are pushing the limit on their financing. So I would say previously remodel work done improperly, you really got to look at it and ask yourself, what is done improperly? Another big one that I've heard a lot on is code issues. This isn't up to code. That wasn't done to code. One of the first questions you have to ask yourself, or the inspector for that matter, some of them know, is what code? Is this not done to today's code, and you're down in the South Valley or a Moss home that was built in the 50s? Well, of course it's not done to code. There are a lot of things like that that you have to ask. So if you relax and just ask some questions about what improperly really means, you might be able to provide a better response, a more educated, calm response.
Great. Thank you, Grant. The second issue that a lot of people are having issues with right now is electrical issues. Justin, can you speak to that a little bit?
I'd like to piggyback on the code issue, because that's usually what comes up in the electrical inspections. Is this isn't to code, but there have been codes written year after year. Our code cycle is a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years, somebody comes up with something better, some better way of doing it, some different material that typically costs more money, or somebody can sell something, or the codes are intended, our code is intended to decrease or eliminate fire hazards. It's a fire code. So at its core, it's supposed to keep everything safer in respect to fire. In reality, a lot of times what's written into the code is who's lobbied the hardest to get their arc fault breakers, for example, into the code, or what type of wire has been manufactured. It's the newest and best thing. We run into a lot of oil and cloth wiring. I know you all have seen that or heard that come up. That was to code when it was put in. That was the latest and greatest thing. Now it seems a little ridiculous to put something that's flammable next to electricity in the wall, but it was to code, and so it's really unfair to say that this isn't built to code. So I think the biggest thing is reasonability, like Grant was talking about. That's or Federal Pacific panels or any panels that have been outlawed. There's reasons why they've been outlawed. Knob and tube is another one that we run into all the time, where we're not allowed to touch it. It's been, it's got a big stigma about it. These panels, but when they were installed, they were the best thing, So if it's working, oftentimes, and it's been working, especially for years and years, oftentimes it's probably not a safety issue. It may be if you look at something and it looks obviously like it's sparking, or it's, you can tell by reasonability that it's a safe or an unsafe condition. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that when an inspector comes up with something that's not to code, I think the biggest question to ask your customer is, do you feel safe the way this is installed? Not what is the inspector saying is current code, but do you feel safe with this? And body language goes a long way, because we've all seen, I'm trying to think of an example where, we've seen over and over again the same installs that have been perfectly safe and perfectly fine, but this customer who's in kind of a raw moment, some of them, especially if it's the first time home purchase, or even if they've just been in a couple homes, it's a raw moment. It's a big investment. It's a lot of money either coming in or going out, and so the biggest thing for us is to put them at ease with these issues that come up from the inspectors.
Justin, can you also briefly talk about aluminum wiring and when that's a concern and how to handle that?
What kind of wiring?
Aluminum.
Aluminum. So here's the deal. A couple of things that come up. Here's the issues that are involved. Aluminum wiring it contracts and expands at a greater rate than copper. So really, we're dealing with hot and cold issues. So when when the connection is made typically with a screw terminal, so that screw doesn't move, and if the wire contracts and expands, it can create an arcing condition where electricity will jump, electrons will try to jump and get to ground. That's essentially what they're trying to do. So I would say pigtailing, or the other thing that can happen if it's a grounding aluminum issue, which oftentimes if you've got aluminum wiring, sometimes there's a grounding issue that comes up too. You can put GFCI receptacles in the wall, and that creates a safe condition for the customer, and it also gives you the benefit of pigtail, because you're obviously going into that box and pigtailing. So that's really your issue, is the hot and cold. It is something I think that's worth doing. I don't think you need to rewire the whole house necessarily, because so aluminum will break easier too, that hot and cold condition. But in a wall, unless the mice are in their jumping rope with the aluminum wire, it's not going to be moving very much. So that contraction expansion is not necessarily an issue on straight wire. The issue is at the connections, in the panels, or at the receptacle.
The third thing that we're seeing a lot of issues with is plumbing issues, primarily with Kitech plumbing and polybutylene, and replums not done properly. Johnny, can you speak to that a little bit?
Okay, so everybody knows, I'm sure everybody is familiar with poly. That's been around a long time, probably mid-70s, mid-90s, and then Kitech came out in the mid-90s. up to about 2007. So the problem with it is with the poly, there's a lot of problems with the fittings and then some with the pipe. And the same thing happened with Kitech. Right now we're finding the biggest problem we're having with Kitech is, and that's a weird word, is de-zinkification. De-zinkification. So what's happening where the fitting is, the pipe is it's a layer of plastic with a layer of aluminum and a layer of plastic. So the fitting is touching the aluminum and it's causing basically a corrosion. So they have come out with a fix for that. How well it is, it's kind of a newer fix where you take the fitting off and they have one with a seal in it. So you're able to put a sealing surface on the fitting and that's supposed to stop the problem. Obviously we don't know how well that works because it's something fairly new.
We see a lot of issues with Sano Tubing and Sano Tubing failing. Can you kind of explain what that is, why it fails, and what the options are when that happens?
Okay, Sano Tube was basically a cardboard pipe that was put under slab. And when it was installed, it's like with any pipe, even if you're using metal, it's supposed to have 2 inches of concrete encased around it. Mm-hmm. So obviously these pipes are failing. Some of it's due to moisture from evaporated coolers. The majority of it is the pre-pour around the pipe was done improperly. So that's allowing the soil to sit on the tubing and rot the tubing out. And once the tubing gets rotted out, your choices are very limited. There are some companies out there that can put in a spray liner, depending on how far the damage has been on the pipe. A lot of times you have to go in these houses and figure out another way to put in another heating and cooling system.
What's a spray liner?
It's basically a hard plastic. Some companies go in there, they run a kind of a cable with nozzles on it. They pull through the duct and they seal it.
And I've been told, and Johnny, you can tell me if this is true or not, 99% of the time that's not a permanent solution. That's more of a temporary Band-Aid on a problem that's going to
Most of the
come back.
companies are offering anywhere between a 5 and 10 year warranty on it.
Okay.
So yeah, it is a temporary solution.
And again, that's something to explain to your clients as well. It's typically half the price of reducting in the attic or finding another solution. So explaining that to your clients that they're already halfway to getting new ductwork and that's a permanent solution. So definitely encourage that second option. The fifth big problem that we're seeing is sewer line problems. And I'm going to pass this off to Johnny as well, just the big issues that you're seeing with that and why.
Well, the biggest issue with sewer line problems is obviously now a lot more people and realtors are having the lines checked. So, and it's getting called out oftentimes of being, there's different materials out there. There's Orangeburg, and any of these you probably have heard of, clay tile, transite. Of course, we have our plastics. The biggest problem that I've been seeing with these is the connections at some of the older piping has had roots that has infiltrated into the pipe. So, and most of these, the piping is solid, it's just at the connection. So if you have a sewer cleaning done in them and then keep up with that, your customers can go a long time without any issues, without having to replace. It's getting called out that lines need to be replaced. That's not necessarily true. If the piping's good and you have small intrusions in some of the joints, you can just do yearly or a couple yearly maintenance on them and be fine. Another problem is when the pipe's collapsing, such as Orangeburg. When you start having collapsing problems, it obviously has to be replaced, and that's where you have to figure out the best and the most convenient way to replace lines. So that's really pretty much it with the...
Yeah, definitely. And I would also say, I know a lot of realtors only really encourage their buyers to get sewer line inspections when they're down in the valley or in areas where there are well-established trees. We recently had a situation where Comcast had bored their cable line through the sewer line in this house, and it would have gone completely undetected if our seller, or I'm sorry, if our buyer didn't get it inspected.
You can see the sewer on TV then, right?
And that was in an area that was completely, almost near new construction, so no big trees. They didn't think there was going to be an issue with collapsing sewer lines from aged pipes. So I would say no matter the location, no matter the age of the home, that's definitely an inspection worth doing. So next we're going to go into the top 5 best practices. So essentially the ways that if faced with these pitfalls, how to best go about, I guess, avoiding them to where they're not avoiding, but being educated to where they don't become such a problem. The first one is to get documentation for all of the work done by the current owners.
Documentation is an interesting thing because you kind of have to know what's being documented. Otherwise, it's just information on a piece of paper. Like you could have documentation that this house had new Kitech plumbing put in it, and that doesn't mean anything because it's going to corrode. So you want to be careful. Documentation does not mean good. I'll put it that way. You could have documentation that a contractor came and worked on the house, and you could talk to somebody, a plumber or a mechanical guy, and they'll say that documentation isn't worth the paper it's written on. So documentation, you got to ask what exactly is being documented. It doesn't solve anything. However, the documentation can help you at least ask the right questions. So when you see a document that says they had a remodel done, and you see documents about a contract or whatever, of what work was done, that can help you ask, all right, was there anything done to the plumbing? Was there anything done to the HVAC? Was there anything done to the electrical? And that might at least give you the ability to tell your homeowner, do you want to check some of this out further? You could get I'm a contractor, so people are going to have a document they could give you that says the house was remodeled, but it's not going to tell you so many details about all the electrical work that was done, all the plumbing work that was done. It's just going to say installed new bathroom. That's what it says on the contract. So documentation is good because it can get you better educated on what questions to ask. Of course, without documentation, which is the whole point of improperly work done, they're not going to have it. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, yeah, definitely. Just the fact that before even listing the house, ask them if they've had work done so that you can ask those follow-up questions that 99% of buyers are going to want to know anyway. If you're the listing broker, strongly encourage your seller to do a pre-listing inspection. Again, in this market, you want, when buyers aren't doing that much due diligence prior to writing the offer, it's important to try and solve as many problems before going under contract. So, Grant, do you want to speak to that a little bit as well?
Just real briefly, that's an awesome thing to do because you guys know more often than not, there are certain times that big issues freak out a buyer. But more often than not, it's when the inspection comes in and you drop a ream of paper in front of them and says, okay, we got a few problems. And when in reality, most of the problems that come up on an inspection, 90% of the problems that come up on an inspection every single time might take an hour and a half to fix. You know, screw this little screw in, tighten that little thing, have the plumber come out and do a little this and a little that. They're relatively simple. If you can get in a pre-listing inspection so that when the buyer comes in and you've taken care of all of those little things and there's a few things on there, even if they're big, it's still just going to be easier to present because it's just not that many items. That's hugely helpful because it's totally a psychology thing.
So number 3 on the list is kind of the reverse of that. If you're the selling broker, encourage your buyers to fully inspect the house. There's copious amounts of inspections available to buyers now. Things that we've already touched on, like the sewer line and the duct, radon, mold, infrared, thermal inspections for radiant heat. It is worth a few $100s now to where your buyer knows everything that they could possibly know about that house up front. Not only does it take liability off of you as a realtor, but if they know everything that they need to know about that house and they're confident, they're going to want to refer you to all of their family and friends. So it's worth having that tough conversation of, hey, I know it's $125 for a sewer line inspection, but it's worth the tens of thousands of dollars that a problem that goes undiscovered could possibly be. Grant, is there anything that you want to touch on as far as that goes? Kind of the same.
I'm not even sure why that's a question.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, you want to really make your homeowners happy? Get the sewer to back up a day or two after they move in. They'll love you forever. I mean, this is kind of, if you're not having the buyers fully inspect the house, you're asking for it.
The fourth best practice is to verify the age of the mechanics, roof, et cetera, before marketing it as new or newer. I oftentimes will see in the property remarks, newer heater, and then when the inspections come around, it's actually 3 years ago. Or even worse, 5, 10 years ago. So I would encourage that, especially with sellers that have been in the house for a long time, what might feel like a couple years ago to them was actually 2005. So before you market that as such, which sounds silly, but I've had 3 transactions in the last 2 months where something was marketed like this. Jeff, do you kind of want to talk about the liability of that and putting it in MLS without having?
Certainly. I've done a little bit of research last week on your own inventory here of the use of new and newer. So at the point when you're listing it and going into marketing remarks, you may or may not have verified this information. It may have been passed along verbally, or you've just maybe going, hopefully not off the old listing, but you've maybe done your diligence. But when it comes down to it, use of the term new and newer you need to be mindful of how you're using that. You're not going to necessarily get a call from me or compliance MLS because it's not, what I would call inaccurate data, or we could verify it maybe off public or tax record. But some examples I can share are one of my favorites. Advertising is a newer roof in the marketing remarks, and I look at the seller's disclosure as just to verify a source, and it says 3 years old there. So I can't tell you what a time frame, what new is. I can't say it's 3 months, 6 months, a year. But I've seen a lot of examples, and in my review, some a little bit better than others. One where they'll say new roof, and they'll say done 1 year ago, or new AC, 1 year old. So they may have done a little bit more. That's a little different than just saying newer carpet, new roof. But again, if it was done in 2011, is that really new or newer? So that's the thing. So just be mindful and careful of those remarks. It could potentially lead down the road to liability facing in court, or having to speak in front of the commission. So.
And then finally, number 5, be aware of pitfalls common to that specific area of town or age of home. Yes, it will prevent having pitfalls and big problems later, but it also makes you look like the expert. And that's how you're going to get referral business from that client. So I just kind of wanted to touch on a few of the major ones. Johnny, I know you touched on it earlier, but if you want to go over where poly is common, where Kitech's common, where Sano Tube.
Okay, well, a lot of things. When somebody calls me and say, I have a question about a house, one of the first questions you ask is, where's the house? You get over to, Nob Hill area, pretty much all the sewer lines over there are going to be clay tile or Orangeburg. So you already know what you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. As far as poly was really popular in Rio Rancho. Mm-hmm. You find more poly homes in Rio Rancho than you will anywhere else. We've done some repipes. Actually, the first repipes that happened in Albuquerque, I was working for my father, we did them there. And the first ones that we did was actually up of Eubank by San Francisco area. Okay. So it spread out. At that time, it was, when a new product comes out, it's up to the plumber. And I'm sure electrician, when any new products come out, it's up to the contractor, plumber, electrician to decide if they're going to use them or not. I take most of them as snake bite oil. I won't try them right away until they've been around for a while. So you're going to find more poly in Rio Rancho than you will anywhere else. But you have to be aware that it can be in any home from, approximately mid-70s, 74 on. If the house is built in, you do need to have it checked to see that if it has poly in it or not. And then, of course, Kitech was, started in the 90s. So we know that there was a boom. There's a lot of houses built in. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of plumbers using it for the ease and the convenience of installing it. And and they're spread out all over. There's a lot of that in Rio Rancho.
On the west side.
On the west side, there's a lot of areas that have the polyuric high-tech installed.
And what about Sano Tubing?
What? Yeah, Tanawan. Sano Tube is pretty much sprouted everywhere, but we see more of it up in the Northeast Heights than we do in anywhere else, because it seems like that was a time period when the houses were going in and the Sano Tube was popular.
And that's where groundwater is.
And that's,
And
yeah.
Northeast Heights is where you have groundwater. Northeast Heights, you buy a home that has a basement, you need to know there's a strong chance there's groundwater up against that basement wall. There's a layer of clay that runs underneath that decomposed granite. All the water off the mountain, water from the landscaping, it goes down about 6 to 10 feet. It hits this layer of clay and it just runs all the way to the river. I built a basement in Quintessence off of Academy and Eubank, and when we dug the hole, there's a clear line right across, and the water is just cascading out of this line. So part of your duct problem in the Northeast Heights is the groundwater problem in the Northeast Heights.
So it's more of a time frame, I think, that I've noticed for us than it is a location area, because they come up with different codes and different products to match those codes per time period than they do. So we'll see knob and tube from the 50s and 60s all across the city. It really depends when they were building. So Rio Rancho, obviously, there's not much knob and tube out there because it wasn't even thought of at that point. So I think for us, it's more of a time period. Any homes before the 90s, you're going to see aluminum wiring. Aluminum was more based on economics than it was functionality of it. When copper's really expensive, they allow the aluminum. Oh, it's just fine now, and then when copper comes down, they put copper back in the walls. I think honestly, I think the bigger issue, more than wiring for us, electrically speaking, is the recalled panels, because ultimately I would never recommend this, but I can go grab, depending how I'm grounded, depending the context of the situation, I can go grab electricity and it's not going to hurt me, or it's not going to hurt somebody. If there's a problem in a wall, or there's a problem with the circuiting, or some fly-by-night, or some homeowner or somebody came in and did the wiring wrong, and it's even potentially a dangerous situation, ultimately that circuit is going to go back to its protective, its overcurrent protection, its breaker. No matter what the wiring, no matter what the time period, wherever it is in the city, state, county, the biggest thing for you guys to look at is the how it's protected, meaning the breaker situation.